Hi, everyone, and welcome to another video testimonial. These are truly my most favorite things to do because I get to showcase my graduated clients. Now, this one that I have today is extra special, so you're going to want to tune in. She started as a Big Four senior associate and then shifted to a corporate controller at a major insurance firm, and now she's starting a whole new chapter of her life. And I could go on and on and on, but I'm just going to introduce her right now so you can get to meet her too. This is Liz. Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Lauren.
So, would you love to like to give a little bit of a background because you have some, you have some international exposure, you have a big life chapter. Give me like a 30-second interview of who you are, and then we'll like dive into our conversation.
Sure. So I was born and raised in South Africa. Started working at KPMG and then moved to the States on what was supposed to be just an 18-month international rotation. Met my ex-husband, and then, 22 years later, here I am. So I've had a really, good time in New York City. Busy work life, busy everything. And now, as you alluded to, I'm actually now on my way back to Africa again after 16 years of basically being mostly single. I finally met the real love of my life, and I'm moving back to Africa. So it's been, a crazy ride. And I think the 4.5 years that you and I worked together has been, such a pivotal part of that whole transformation. So, yeah, I would love to share some of what we worked
Oh
on,
yeah.
how that's changed my life.
Oh yeah, we're gonna dig in. I love it. And this is everyone's story is so unique, and I really want to highlight yours because it's as unique as everyone else's, but I think it will resonate for a lot of us. So just as a little context, Liz and I have worked together pre-pandemic for 4.5 years through the pandemic. So you can imagine like what life was before COVID, and which is probably at this point, if you're listening, similar to how it is now, where people are back in the office, back in the full-time thing, but also the transition of COVID. Who am I? What do I want for myself? What's going on? So we had been together for 4.5 years of coaching. And what I love about this interview specifically is that you're a year and a half out. It's been a while since we've been in touch, but even as you alluded to just a minute ago, the work that we did together continues to have a ripple effect in your life. So let's go in because I have some questions for you that everybody was going to want to hear. But tell me about that pre-pandemic when we met in 2019. What were you experiencing when you first came, found me, and how did you maybe first find me? Because I always find that interesting as well.
Right. So, if I remember correctly, we started on what was, just a 3-month, like sort of a group setting, project. And I had heard you speak at an industry event, and I'd said to myself, at that point in my life, it was just like everything was come crashing down, right? I was working a lot. I basically showed up every morning in the office already feeling angry, which is not a really good day to start your week or your day. I've been like sort of 2 years out of a long-term relationship, and I was kind of dealing with just everything that comes with online dating and all of that stuff. Like I said, I was really at a tough place in my job, and just doing with. I mean, it was not. I realized none of this is unique, right? It's stuff that people deal with every day. But I kind of had like I kind of knew that I wanted to just find options, and I felt like I was so busy that I never had really time. On weekends, I were always doing like a million things in the city, going to every new show or concert or event, because I somehow had to feel that, my life is worth living. I work so hard to make money during the week, that I have to do something fun on weekends because that's the only time I had. So I think when we started talking, it was sort of more focused on stress management and health and happiness and things like that. And then I think it was like literally within the first two of those group coaching sessions, I realized that no, I need to have more of this. And I think I just reach out to you and say, can we transform this into like just an individual coaching session? Because I felt like I was talking too much and wanting too much from you just in a group session. And I think that's where it started. And I had no idea at that point that it was going to, morph into this another 4 years after that, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's the interesting thing for me too, because I sometimes feel like I need to have all the answers or see the whole thing at the beginning. And I was very focused on, I don't want it to waste your time in coaching. I don't definitely don't want it to waste my own time. Like, what exactly do I need to work on? Because I just didn't see the answers at that point. But I thought working on sort of health and stress management, and that was sort of, a good way to start. And that's where we started off.
I love it. Yes, I remember all of it. I remember when we first met. I remember when you came to even like Liz was at my launch party like years and years and years ago. And so we worked together through many iterations of the business, but the core of it, the stress management, the finding joy and work-life balance, finding a version of yourself that you are proud of is really the ripple effect of like what's been consistent throughout. So yes, we work together. Now, one thing that I'm sure someone listening to this is like 4.5 years of coaching. Like, do I need that much coaching or what? Like, what happens? Did it take you 4 years to solve your stress management? Like, tell me how each, and we don't have to go through like, program by program, but the idea is like over time, tell me about almost like what I speak to as like the layers of the onion of how we started with maybe the more superficial level of stress management, but over time we started to evolve. What was that like in your experience?
Yeah, so I think that first 6 month program was, very focused on basic things. And there was times that I thought, you know, none of this is rocket science. It's things that that maybe you already know, but you don't know how to implement it in your life. Like
Mm,
just I was not sleeping enough. I was at the office all the time, so I had to order, take out food every night to eat at my desk. My lifestyle was not that happy, and I was not drinking water. And these are all, again, none of, these are all things I knew I had to do, but I think it helped me to just speak to somebody who I think a lot of our experiences have been different. So you understood what I was going through from like a really busy work life, but you could bring without, and I think, to interrupt myself, like what I was end up doing is I would just be so hard on myself. And I'm like, I know I should be drinking water. Like I know I should be eating a salad instead of ordering Italian again. But, it's just like, how do you make that happen? Because when you're working so hard and there's so much stress, sometimes you end up, rewarding yourself with the pasta that you order for dinner or something like that. So I think a
mhm,
lot of our conversations also was about how do I just have grace for myself, right? Like, how do I sort of appreciate what I'm going through at this point, and instead of beating myself up all the time, how do I just find space to sort of acknowledge, the challenges? And then that gave me, I think, some room to say like, okay, but, I want to be better at this. And you were, holding me accountable. And I think that's what I sort of needed.
mm,
And then that transformed. I think the second 6 month program, was really interesting. We dig more into like Ayurveda, which I knew nothing about, and like hormones and health and all this stuff because I was going through some health issues. I like it's not stuff that you always like talk about to with people, but between like hemorrhoids and I had like surgery for like hernias, and I think my stress level had gotten to the point where it was really starting to impact my physical health. So I'd already had the emotional drainness and anger and all that stuff that I was dealing with every day. But when I started to see that it's actually impacting my physical health, and I was constantly having yeast infections and just stuff like that. And I think we did like small things, but things that maybe never had occurred to me on my own. I was on birth control for like 20 years, right? And it was like our conversations that led me to really do deeper research in, all the negativities that come with that, and at the
mhm.
end of the day, I was lucky, we ended up, I ended up making the decision, obviously with your guidance, to get off of birth control, and that happened right at the beginning of 2020. And little did I know that, I went back to South Africa to visit my folks at the end of February 2020, and then I couldn't get back because and a week before I had to return, the country went in lockdown, and I ended up being stuck there like till the end of May. And at that point, there was just one less thing that I had to worry about because now I could live a healthier life. And that, so there was so many small things that looking back, it's like, oh, it's not genius to say, this pill that you take all the time that's maybe causing some depression, impacting your health in so many different ways. But just taking the responsibility of looking more into that and just getting some guidance on you and things like because I think sometimes it feels overwhelming. Oh, there's so many things in my life that's wrong. I'm not sleeping enough. I'm not drinking water. I'm not eating enough. Like, but then you feel like it's impossible to change all of those things overnight, so you just don't do anything about it. And I think with coaching, that really helped me focus just on one thing at a time and just, you know, and I think there's so many I was thinking about all the things that I've learned through this time, and it's so funny. Every now and again, it's literally like, I mean, it's so many years later, and I was like, literally, like your voice would pop up in my head, right? Like when I would hear you say, like, you can have everything, but not all at once, or I would hear you say, like, how is this serving you? And I think those are the things that, it's made such a big difference at the end of my life.
Hmm. It's so beautiful. I love hearing that because what's happening is anyone who's listening to this can feel the story of someone who's coming in stressed and then just like feeling the weight of the stress, but then building an awareness. So many times in coaching programs or you hear people speak and who are, experts in the industry and it's like, well, step one is to be aware. And it's like, okay, well, there's actually a step zero, which is like to figure out what the heck is going on because you can't really be aware. We're not trained to understand that this is actually a symptom of stress.
Right.
75 to 90% of all visits to the doctor are for stress-related health concerns. So we can cherry pick and say, okay, well, I have eye twitches or hemorrhoids or I'm experiencing just like low energy or I'm not sleeping well or any of these symptoms, but we're not connecting the puzzle of the impact stress is having on our overall well-being. And so
Yeah, and I
this,
think it really
Good.
impacts like how you show up everywhere, right? I think that's no wonder, dating was a challenge for me. I mean, if I get to the office already angry every day, like how am I going to go on a dinner date on a weekend, and just show up as like a calm, peaceful, happy version of myself, and then you get together with your girlfriends and all you do is you end up railing about like how dating suck or how your jobs suck. And I think you end up talking so much about negativity and that was also an important thing for me is like realizing that that balance was missing in my life and what to do to align it. Because again, it feels like such a big step to go from, 0 to 180 or something, but to realize that it takes time and it's a gradual process and every small, tiny step that you make overall gets you there. And I think that
Mhm.
was the big thing with work, right? Like, I had been in the same position for 15 years and I, experienced all the things that many people, and especially many women experience. I feel overutilized, but also overworked in a way. So I was doing a lot of like mindless, frustrating things, basically because nobody else wanted to do them, and I actually cared. But then I also had like at the same time I had the imposter syndrome of thinking, oh my God, they're finally going to figure out I know nothing and all this stuff. So that was like a really big challenge for me. And I think something that helped me working with you is that, you know, I would I would go on and on, during one of our coaching sessions or many of our coaching sessions about how my job sucked, right? And then you would be like, okay, so what am I going to do about it? But you never, and then, I would maybe make a plan of like, oh, I want to get involved in something else at work. I want to write like a business plan that we're going to start like a women's group because if we do something like that, then maybe I would feel like it helps me. It sort of adds some purpose amongst the meaningless things. And then when that didn't work out, but you never force me to say like, oh my God, you like stop complaining or quit your job, right? Even during these times where, I would say, okay, I have this plan, I'm going to quit my job. And I think that's where I landed, pretty quickly after we started working at the end of 2019, my idea was like, okay, I'm here, I'm ready. Like I still had this, I think I still had this fantasy that I just wanted to quit my job, go to South Africa and then come back and I don't know, go to France and go work on a farm or something. And luckily you helped me with like realize that that's sort of like an escape, sort of fantasy or whatever else. But the idea was still to go to South Africa, visit for a month, and then come back and then actively like start looking for a job. Because even just that is so hard to do when you're already exhausted and you're already at full capacity. Um,
Mm,
but then, when COVID started and the whole job situation changed, because then we were working from home for the first time, I had more of a work-life balance because I could do stuff after work because I somehow managed to get all my work done in a 7-hour workday simply because there's no people walking into my office interrupting me all the time. So then I started to feel like, but no, this is actually not so bad. And then even with that, so there was like a lot of ups and downs in this process. And I think what helped me is at no point did I feel sort of judged by you or anything like that. That I'm like, you said your job sucks, so why are you fine with it now again? And I think all of those steps helped me in the process to get to the point where when I finally decided to leave, I really was ready. I'd exhausted all options. I did what I wanted to do. It's not, one of like a relationship where you say like, oh, I ended it too soon and always want to keep going back, right? I kind of knew that I was ready to make that move.
huge. And I think a lot of people listening to this can resonate because there's part of us who've invested years and years into our job, and now we're not fulfilled for whatever reason. There can be a lot of reasons, but if you weren't, let's say, like you were mentioning, like underutilized and overworked. And so if you're underutilized, where you're not challenged, you're not learning, you're not growing, that is actually a version of burnout. On top of overworked, still putting in the hours, and then feeling like you're not getting the recognition. Also, smoke before the fire of burnout. So I know we didn't like say the B word on this call, but it was definitely in the atmosphere when you can see it manifesting in your emotions, in your mindset, in your physical form. And that's where over the time, what we were doing, like you said so beautifully, is one layer at a time, one thing at a time, one step at a time to get you to a place where you feel good. So first it was it's always the what I say, like the lowest hanging fruit or the loudest, screaming thing, which was your health. And then we were able to say, okay, now that health is feeling more stable, we can really start to put our energy into work because it's hard to kind of push for a promotion or for a new opportunity in the job when we're not making maybe the best decisions and we can't sleep. So there's layers to the process, starting with the health. And for me, I talk about it as energy, mindset, and body. And then we talk about, or mindset and physical form, I should say. And then we talk about strategy. And this is you at work. Do I stay? Do I go? Before I just abandon my career, let me exhaust every option. And you really truly did that, looking at transfers, looking at just getting promoted because you deserved it, because you had been in the same role for so long of what's next for me, looking at extracurricular opportunities of maybe it's my job, that's fine, but it's the other stuff that's affecting me. So we really exhausted every option. And when I work with clients, there's this feeling from when they first meet me of like, I want to quit my job. I got to get out of here. And what you realized, which is so valuable, is that yes, I do want to get out of here, but let me double check that it's not me, that I don't bring this baggage of what I'm experiencing at my current company and just bring it to a new firm, because that's what so many of us do. We're like, I'm going to abandon my current career and all my problems will be solved at this new company. And the reality is they're usually not. Maybe for like 6 months, it's a honeymoon period, but it doesn't last that long. So I
Right.
really appreciated your journey of how you were going through one step at a time. But as mentioned earlier, you did ultimately still quit. So tell us about that. Tell us about the thoughts behind the decision, how that went for you, and like that initial integration of, I have this like quote stable corporate job, but like now I'm free. Tell me
Right.
about that.
So I think actually, if I just take a step back, I think I actually started the year earlier with like big transformations in my life. And once that ball started rolling, I think it just kept on rolling. So, I've been renting or like living in the same apartment, Jersey City, for 13 years. And a lot of that contribute. I mean, like anything, there's pros and cons. Like there even was with the job, there's pros and cons, right? And then I finally made the decision in 22 to move to Westchester. And I had a lot of what I now realize was limiting beliefs about even that. A lot of my single girlfriends who lived in the city would be like, oh, you can't move to the suburbs. If you can't find a guy in Manhattan, how are you going to find a guy dating up there? A long time, I built my world around all these like fears about what is keeping me in Jersey City. I'm so close to the city, like this active life, while also not really enjoying it. So, after I made this really big move to Westchester and then see like what an amazing thing that had been, like how much happier I was, how much more at peace. And it obviously helped that it was during sort of that phase in COVID still where I was only going into the office once a week. So I could really appreciate, being out in nature, having quick access to hiking trails and biking paths and stuff like that. And I think that all helped. So once I made that major move in my life, I realized that, it's not so scary and bad as I really thought. And I think that kind of helped me with the job process. So after I had exhausted, all opportunities or like looking for other opportunities at the company, and after somebody had finally mentioned to me like that, in order to move somewhere else, I would no longer be under my current boss's management. And after somebody pointed out that there was just no way he would ever let me go, it was sort of like a finale where I kind of realized like it would be this. So I could stay for the money. I made like, a really decent salary. And that is what I think kept me there for so long because people always think like, so what kept you there if you're so miserable? And I think, being single, living in a country where, I was by that time obviously like a citizen, but still not having family or something around. Like I had like a lot of fear about just having financial independence. And I think when you work in a senior position and you make a really good salary, that often keeps you there because you tell yourself, well, it's so hard to get another job at this level. I'm not going to be able to get it, all these things, right? It's going to be so much more work to prove myself to new people. So why don't I just rather stay here? But so once I've made that decision, the ball could start rolling. And then, I kind of had like a lengthy period of time. I said that I wanted to do the right thing and have enough time to stay on as long as they would need me so I could, spend enough time with my successor. I realized after 15 years in a senior position, I was not going to just give a 2 week notice, right? So at the end, I stayed on through, the end of the second quarter to help with all the closes and transitions. And then I stayed on for a couple of months on a part-time basis as a consultant. And that I think also helped me to transition to the new reality
Mm.
of no longer, being sort of this go-to person. And because I think some of the work that I've done with you had made me realize that and this is really almost like embarrassing to say it, but I think for a really long time, a lot of my self-worth was tied up in my title and my comp and my office next to the CFOs, right? And being sort of the go-to person. And I kind of realized that I didn't like that version of myself who's so focused on these things, how all these things make me feel so important. But it was also a factor of, I wasn't married any longer. I never had kids. So I kind of felt like this is the one thing in my life that I've succeeded in is my job. And if I now leave, I'm going to look like a failure or something else. And then, I mean, another big decision was, do I work right away? So I think with the work that we've done, I've realized that I have reached some level of burnout. And just my mindset is so negative that I didn't see a scenario in which I could start, interviewing right away and actually be positive about it and want to roll up the sleeves and get into a new job and work. And I knew that what I had to do was just to take a sabbatical. And I wanted to take some time off. And even that decision was hard, right? Because
Mhm.
it feels like you kind of have to allow yourself to do nice things. It's one thing going to Carnegie Hall on a weekend, but it's another thing to quit your job without having another job. And I think especially in America, a lot of my American friends just was really angry and telling me that I'm making a big mistake. Whereas if talk to friends in Europe, it's a much more common thing for people to take a break in between.
Mm.
So I had to get over those fears of like, how am I going to do this? But then just taking the time and allowing myself to go hike in Italy for 3 weeks and then go visit a friend in Montana for however long I want to, and then go to South Africa. And for the first time in 20 years, be able to visit my family in South Africa without at the same time having to log into emails constantly, having to release wires and doing things that other people couldn't do because of dollar limits and stuff like that. So that was the first time that I could actually be present, and even that changed how I think I saw things, and helped me to align with the balance that I want in my life, decided how I want my next job or my next chapter to look like. Because I think a lot of the problems was really initiated by me, right? Like I worked 14-hour days, but it's because I was always volunteering for everything. I was always redoing stuff that, my team had did that wasn't up to my standard. I had to cross every T and dot every I to perfection. Every reconciliation had to have less than a 10% balance or something like, just obscene things, which I think helped me to understand why I was working all the time, and how I would want to do that different the next time, instead of just, to your point, starting in and then 6 months later it's the exact same story, and you could have just stayed where you were and kept making the big
Mhm.
bucks, right? And even with the salary, right? I had to realize what are the things that's important. And I think a lot of in the sabbatical, I got a big opportunity to do that, right? I've always known that, I've always worked, right? I worked as an intern in high school. I worked as an intern in college, and then I got a job at KPMG, and, it was just one thing after another. So I never took a break and just traveled through Europe extensively and things like that. And I kind of wanted to do that. And I wanted to do some volunteer work. And, it took me a while to figure that out at the beginning of my sabbatical, because I wanted to do something meaningful and really be fully in it. And I finally joined an ambulance corps, because most of the ambulance corps in Westchester is volunteer. And I think that was the first time that I really felt like part of like a meaningful community, right? Where it's not odd that I don't have kids or that I'm not married. And, because I think a lot of those things makes you feel like an outsider, when people talk about their kids or things like that. So it made it harder, I think, just to make new friends in an area where you live as well. But now I was part of a community, and it was the craziest thing. I remember there was one day where there was like a pretty big snowstorm, and I was booked on a shift. And as I was driving on basically right behind a plower on this highway to go on my shift, I was thinking about like, how am I not even, I'm actually looking forward to this. But when it was like a snow day and I had to trek into the office in the past, I would be so angry because I'm like, this suck. I'm putting my life at risk here to go to my stupid office job because they won't even allow us to work from home when there's a snowstorm. And here it's a volunteer job where I don't even get paid. And I was so excited to go because I knew there was going to be a lot of 911 calls that day, a lot of, people with slip and fall and stuff like that. And it just felt meaningful, right? It's the first time. And it's not like it's all about it, but I think it did play a role that there was actually people thanking you for what you did. When you pick a 90-year-old lady just up from when she fell out of her bed and now she needs to be transported and people to the hospital, and people are really just look at you and just say thank you. I felt like, how is this not something I ever experienced in my job? Right now, obviously, people don't have to thank you because you get paid to do the job. But I think just that changed my mindset too, about how I want to live my life, what's important to me, and what to focus on.
I love that. So one thing that I think will be worth extracting, because so many who will listen to this will be fantasizing about a sabbatical. They'll hear your story and be like, screw it, I'm going to quit my job. And
Right.
you know what? During the Great Resignation, a lot of people did.
Yeah.
But I want you to tell me the difference of what going on a sabbatical versus going on a sabbatical with having coaching support. Like, what would have been the difference if you just decided to quit, abandon ship, and just like wing it versus
Yeah.
like intentionally creating a life that felt free and where you could refill your cup? So tell me what that was like for you and the difference of what you could have imagined.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine that if you're just on a sabbatical and with just on your own terms or something, I think that can easily get derailed, right? Because it's like having so much freedom all of a sudden. And I think it's easy just to then go into that thing where, I mean, especially in the winter when it's miserable out, where you end up just spending the week in your pajamas watching TV because you can, right? And you don't have to, and you can tell yourself, well, I've deserved this, and all those things. So I think that easily could have happened. And maybe there was like some pieces of that, maybe especially at the beginning. But I think coaching helped me to stay on track of what is the purpose for this sabbatical. I don't want it to just be like a vacation that, I did a lot of fun things and that's it. And nothing really changed. I still wanted to do the work of, I mean, I had to do a lot of inner work of just to process my anger and frustration, to figure out what it is that I want to do next, because that's always the question that everybody asks you. And, there was definitely a period of time where I was just like, I have to change industries, to be in the financial services industry where everything is so male dominated. This was part of the problem. And, I kind of I sort of have a lot of ideas about just doing something totally different where, it took me a while and with coaching to realize like what are my actual strengths and what is it that I actually enjoyed. And a lot of what I did was stuff that I was really passionate about. It was just the environment that I was in that kind of was the challenge, right? And so I think to continue to do the work and not just see it as an escape of, I mean, obviously, when I go a hike for 3 weeks in Italy, we didn't coach during that time. And that was just a pure, fun, entertaining experience. But I think also having pockets of that in between while still staying to trying to stay on track. And then there was periods where I thought like, okay, maybe I should start looking for a job. And then, we helped with that. I was very overwhelmed with just something basic like updating my resume because I haven't done it in 15 years. And now everything is so complicated. You have to have keywords, and LinkedIn is insane. Everybody has like things that's very impressive. And I'm like, where do I even start? But I think with everything, I've always thought that you are such a wealth of knowledge, whether I need a new investment person or a moving company, like you would always be something that knows somebody that can have some recommendations somewhere, knows somebody that can help with resumes, like a recruiter. So I think just having access to that and kind of being able to, even just being able to shoot things off of you, like, and have your ideas and opinions about that, I think really helped.
Yeah, one of the components we have while we were coaching together, and I work with my clients and I still offer this, is we use an app called Signal, and it's just a way that we can stay in touch. And I pride myself on that being that support system and guide, because if we meet, let's say every other week, that's great, but like what's happening on the other, 13 days between the last time we spoke and then the next time we're going to speak? So having that system, did you find that helpful that, you kind of had that framework that you could just kind of drop questions to? Did you have anything that like, I guess what was your experience with that? Because sometimes it's nice to hear what's going on like behind the scenes. Because you're like, okay, so
Sure.
I go on a trip to Italy for 3 weeks. Does that mean I'm not supported?
Right, right. No, having that access to you, it was really, I think, an important part of this whole thing because it's almost like, in a way, like having you filled so many roles. You would, if I said I was going to do something, you would send me like gentle reminders, and then oftentimes you would just reach out totally unexpectedly. And if I was going through a harder thing, because obviously, it was a big adjustment. And there was times that I would, feel sort of negative or sad or, trying to figure out like I thought I was overnight going to find my new purpose and now it's taking a long time. And, sometimes you would literally just be a cheerleader. And I think if you recall, when we finally decided, when we both we came to the conclusion that, our program together was going to end, I think I was like having withdrawal symptoms because I'm like, can I just hold on to this so that I can still talk to you whenever I'm having a challenge? And even that, I mean, we had to spend a little bit of time just, you know, to reinforcing that I have the tool set. Because I think it's so often easily to miss that. Sometimes we have the information in ourselves, but it is just to trust it, to trust that you now have learned and grown and you have it all inside of you. But so that was interesting. But so that was like a very helpful way for me to know that I could reach out to you. It's not just whenever we have a coaching session and in between, nothing was going on. So that was very helpful.
Awesome. What are you celebrating in our time together? I mean, you've gone through some major transformations and we still haven't, well, maybe we'll kind of take this like last chapter of your life as kind of how we wrap up. But, as you've been going through this, like even as we were working together, like what feels like something that you're proud of that you're celebrating from, who you were when we met in 2019 to who you're becoming or have become?
Oh, wow. I mean, I think looking at my life right now, I think it's vastly different from where we were, right? I think just talking about things like health and wellness and things like that have put me on a path of wanting to do more research about this, wanting to live a cleaner life, making decisions about, my diet and things like that, that I think is at the end of the day making like a permanent impact on my life, right? And I think with the work scenario, I think again, and I've said this earlier, but to reiterate, I think there was like such a big realization that took me a surprisingly long time to reach. But when I had that realization of, that I thought that at in a work situation, I'm so confident. I know exactly what to do, and a lot of that comes from being in in the same sort of more or less position for 15 years, being the sort of the go-to person, and the certain sense of ego that that gives you, and realizing that that was not, what I wanted the purpose of my life to be, right? And looking at like rather how I show up in life and where I want the next phase to go. So I think, even now at the place where I'm at, from a romantic perspective, I mean, I think if you can remember, many of our coaching sessions over the years was also just talking about like crazy dating stories with men and how to deal with that sort of rejection and frustration and annoyance. And I think sometimes I would feel like, that you're even in a way like a therapist as well, just dealing with that. But I think, just seeing where I'm now, it was like a long process coming from where I was to where I'm now. And I think a lot of this had to do with every little piece of what we dealt with, whether it was like health or diet or, just a mindset alignment, like little stories. Like, I remember I still think about it all the time as the quote that you once gave me, the story you told about the two wolves and, that's like negative and positive and which one, survives is the one you feed, right? And I think things like that have made like a really big impact on me thinking about no wonder I'm physically getting sick and I'm angry because I have so much negative thoughts in my head and I'm so angry in my work in my head about the work situation, the love situation and all these things. And again, like it took me a while to get there. And sometimes I feel that maybe I should have been able to do it sooner or make decisions quicker. But I think also it's just allowing yourself to take the time to whatever process is needed. And at the end of the day, I feel like this is the path I sort of had to walk, right?
Hmm. It segues into like a perfect question of why you think coaching has been a good decision for you because, I think sometimes there's like good is the enemy of great, where, we're at work, we're making money, we have a good pay, we have a nice little office, but there's a part of us that's like, I should be farther along. And there's almost a shame that can happen that makes us think like having to raise my hand or get help means I'm not good enough. So why when you were feeling that moment in like a lower low that felt like, what, coaching is a good decision for me. And then how did that stay with you throughout the program?
You know what? I think there was a time when I thought to myself that if you're, a somewhat smart person, you should be able to just do it all, right? Like I do my own tax return, even though I'm not a tax person. I was right trying to organize my own investment and my own finances and just all these different aspects in your life. And I think it finally dawned on me that I don't have to take responsibility for all of that. And frankly, I don't have the best answers, and working with experts and different in their own fields can benefit you so much instead of just thinking that you're going with your own ideas. And I think I think one of the good things for me working with you is I feel a lot of our roots is similar. You also having like Big Four experience, so you totally understood where I was coming from because sometimes you can work with a wealth and health person that's sort of just, like a hippie or whatever else, right? You just feel like they don't understand if you're talking about your 14-hour workday. But I knew that you understood all of that and that you had gone through the same. And yet, you had like this whole other area of wellness and Ayurveda and Reiki and meditation and things that was foreign to me, but I could definitely buy into it, knowing that we had these basic roots and at the big in this in that in this at the start.
Hmm.
So I think just that realization of there's a lot of things that that I don't, and why would I not want to benefit from that too? And obviously it takes a while, right? Like I heard you speak at an event, and I think she seems smart and she seems like she really knows what she's talking about. But I mean, for me, it always takes a little bit of a time to build a trust relationship, and because so much of this stuff is so personal and so vulnerable, just being able to get vulnerable with somebody is not something that you easily do because you feel like you're supposed to have it all figured out, and you have to maintain that tough, very competent image that you have to carry every day, and then being able to over time let go of that guard, and that's actually when you first, I think, have the opportunity to then really start working on yourself.
Hmm. So, as a strong type A, determined, kick-ass woman, and I can fill in so many other adjectives, what advice would you give to someone who's like you, who works hard, who maybe be holding some resentment or anger, who deserves more and better? Like, what would you say to them? What wisdom would you give to them for if they're like considering or if they're just struggling in their own microcosm?
Right. I mean, like to your point, everybody's story is different. So maybe, you know, somebody else's story is not going to look exactly like mine. But I would say trust the process with coaching. They definitely it benefited me in so many ways, and I'm so grateful, for just that moment when you showed up at the industry event and I met you and I heard about you because, had I decided that day not to go, maybe I never would have heard about you and the work that you do. So I would say, yeah, absolutely. Trust the process and just believe in your worth, right? I think like often we feel that, like I should be so happy for what I have, and and to want more is just selfish. And maybe for me too, a lot of my, upbringing and, some of my religious upbringing has been this thing of like always, let everybody go first and turn the other cheek and stuff like that. And it's almost like you feel selfish for wanting to prioritize yourself. And I think a lot of our work has just been about that too, where, that question that is still debated today by so many people of do you first put the oxygen mask on you or on the other person, right? So I definitely think that even if you want to look at from a worst case scenario, I'm like, what do you have to lose, right? Like to not work with somebody, right? Um, so yeah, I think I mean, like I'm kind of spinning here a little bit, but I'm just thinking there's so many different topics that we've touched over the years. And I think if I had to recommend to somebody why would they want to think to do coaching, it's just like you can only benefit from it, right? It's like there's so many potential places in your life that you don't even know about. Like to my point, like when we started working, I thought it was just going to be 1 6-month program talking about this. I had no idea, like once we started diving into that, there was all these other places of my life. And I think had I not been open to to exploring that and to do the investment, because at the end of the day, it is an investment, right? It's not just a financial investment, but it's definitely an emotional investment. It's a time investment. You have to make the effort. You can't just show up unprepared all the time and whatever else, because then it's but I think it's at the end of the day, I think I felt like I owe myself that, at least, is to really make an investment in myself. And then I end up doing that, during my sabbatical too, right? Allowing myself to have these different things.
I love it. Any wisdom for working with me that would make someone's life if they're on the fence of like, ooh, I like coaching. I don't know Lauren, but it sounds nice. It sounds like I could trust her based on what you're saying anyway. But is there anything that the world should know that maybe would help them feel more comfortable with taking a leap on, or yeah, like a leap of faith on me?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things. Like, I feel like you have like an uncanny wisdom and, empathy, right? So I feel like no matter what I talk to you about, like what vulnerabilities, whether it was like my relationship with my mom or like my relationship with my ex or whatever else, right? Like you always had a way of understanding and putting that back into how that impacts my life. And like I said, a big thing for me was the fact that we had like a similar base of you also having had like a corporate life and working hard and all that stuff. But there was so many interesting areas that you had that interests that you had that I didn't. And I felt like I ended up benefiting from all those things as well, right? Like from whether it was Ayurveda or whatever else, right? I ended up benefiting from all these different aspects of you as well. So I think bringing some of that richness into your life in ways that I never even thought about. I mean, at the beginning when we started talking about, doshas and Ayurveda, I was thinking like, all right, even when, you referred me to speak to do like a natal reading, I'm like, oh my God, this sounds kind of like airy fairy to me. And it's crazy because at the end of the day, everything in that hour-long conversation that I had ended up being like my life is just it has been fulfilled, right? And I think that has given me some reliance on that as well, that whatever is happening is the right path of what should be happening.
Hmm. Okay, so perfect segue. So let's talk about this last, most recent chapter where we haven't been working together,
Right.
but you've been carrying this guidance with you. So you had been on your sabbatical, you started going back looking for new jobs, and something in your life happened and changed. Tell us about your fairy tale ending, well, at least of this little book that we're writing together.
Yeah. So, I at some point, around, a little, I end up, extending my sabbatical a couple of times for various reasons. And then I got to the point where I'm like, oh, I finally need to start looking for a job. And I started with that. And then at the same time, I just sort of reconnected with a childhood friend on Facebook, and it all happened very, strange. It was just somebody that I've been connected with all the years that just reached out again. And, very soon that became clear that there was a lot more interest in here, but it was, like we live on different continents. What's the problem? And, long story short, I ended up doing another trip over the holidays to visit my family. And then I decided to do a side trip as well. And I think um, you know, we got to the point where we decided we wanted to be together, and there was challenges, right? Like he has teenagers that lives in the house. We live in different continents. We have different professions, and I think for the first time, you know, none of those challenges were like roadblocks to me. They were just challenges that we could overcome. And I think for me personally, a lot of that has been, well, I've overcome so much already, right? I've done things which, I mean, and maybe a move doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you've been, living in the same place for such a long time, moving to like a whole different state and county and whatever else, for me, that was like a big decision, right? So I think a lot of those things helped me to make this decision. And even though our love story like happened really fast, and I think even that would not have happened had I not gone through this whole process in my sabbatical where I became a lot more in tune, like this whole mind, body, soul thing that we've worked on for so long. I was able to figure that out, and it's even clear from a couple of times, some of my ex-coworkers have reached out to just get together and catch up. And it's like every single time somebody would be like, I've never seen you so happy and healthy and relaxed because I think I am so different from who I used to be when I was in that job. And obviously, being on an extended sabbatical would do that for everybody, but I do feel confident that this has made sort of a lasting impact on my life.
Mm.
And now I'm in this whole new chapter where I just got married. I'm moving back to Africa. There's, a lot of that is kind of scary because there are a lot of risks involved and taking this leap of faith basically, and my life is going to be super different. But I'm so grateful for all the opportunities that I've had till now. I'm grateful for having worked with you because again, and not to blow smoke, but I do think that I would not have been at the place in my life where I'm now if we had not done the work together. I think it would have been much harder for me to leave the job and finally get to that point had it not been for the encouragement that you'd give me along the way to realize that whatever decision I make, I'm going to be okay because I could trust myself. And I think it's sad that over, a long period of corporate life that you end up losing that. You lose the trust in yourself and your own abilities um, and I'm so happy that I finally gained that back. That even when I make decisions that may seem rash to other people, that I know I'm doing the right thing because I have that added trust back.
Mm.
So thank you.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. What a beautiful story. And, even the little intro I gave, right? When we talk about someone who started at a big four and went into a big insurance company, went on a sabbatical that changed her life, and being able to have coaching through that. Like, I could see who you are as someone who broke down your fears and no longer is shackled by them, no longer, shackled by other people's expectations. And so now instead of fear, you live by love. Instead of listening to your mind, you follow your heart. And instead of just expecting things to be one way because this is how everyone else does it, you've created your own playbook and you're reaping the benefits. And it's just going to have a continued ripple effect for what I know. It's been a year and a half, but it's going to be for many, 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 many years to come. And it's just hearing your story. It is for me so gratifying, but I hope for everyone who's listening to this to say, what's possible for me? And it's truly your possibility is unlimited. And Liz shares that in her story today. And I could probably start crying if we go on for much longer, but thank you for sharing your story and for being so brave
Absolutely.
and for trusting me as your coach through this process.
Yeah. Thank you for being such a big part of my life and the story. And yeah, I think I would always be grateful for that.
Mm. All right, before we get all teary, I'm going to end this here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'm going to take a breath because I'm like, this was a lot. But I hope this inspires you that truly anything is possible. If you're on the fence of coaching, just see the ROI. It's not just about figuring out your job, it's about having a life that makes you feel free and happy and loved. And so, Liz, thank you for sharing your story. Everyone, thank you for listening. This is longer than our usual episode, but every second is packed filled with gold that you should listen to this probably another 3 times on like at least zero point 0.5 speed because there's so much packed in it. All right, everybody, thank you so much. I'll catch you for the next interview. Bye.